Hello, this is the operations section of Unit 2 and we're looking at production methods. Now there is a little bit of overlap between Unit 1 and Unit 2 here. It's most likely to be when we're looking at batch production, but in Unit 2 it's usually a question based on should they use flow production rather than what they have been using, which is usually batch production. So it's usually between batch production and flow production, whereas in Unit 1 it was much more between job production and batch production. And this is because we're looking at larger operating scales in Unit 2. We're looking at large businesses. As you might have seen in the past papers, there is very often a question based on this, so it's an important area. So here were the definitions of job production and batch production. So job production is making a one-off specialised product for each customer. So it's very much tailored towards the customer's needs. Batch production is making groups or batches of identical items, and they pass through different stages of the production process at the same time. So you might have a bakery that make different types of bread, but they don't just make one loaf, they make batches or groups of loaves. And then flow production is large-scale production where each stage of production is carried out one after the other continuously on a production line. It's quite a bit of a mouthful there. But I'll go through some of the features of it in a second. It is very important though that you do remember batch production from Unit 1. So here I've got a picture of some chairs being produced in batches, and bakery, it's a very common example we use. So this was in the Unit 1 presentation. So the advantages of batch production, it's still very flexible. It allows some customization between batches, so each batch can be slightly varied, slightly different from each other batch. Employees are really unlikely to be doing the whole production process, so it does allow for some specialisation or division of labour. We'll go over what those terms mean in a second. You have a less variety of machinery needed than in job production because you do have some standardisation in the batches. So every item in a batch should be identical to each other. So you don't need the flexibility that you'd need with job production, where every order is completely different from the other, the order that went before. And you can also partly finish goods and store them, so urgent orders can be processed more quickly. And this is comparing it really to job production because it was from the Unit 1 presentation. The disadvantages, though, are that you need careful planning and coordination because you're dealing with a much bigger quantity than with job production, and parts of the production process won't be being utilised or used all of the time. So machines or workers that work on certain sections could be idle or not being used for a period of time. I've put an example there of brewing. This is a very common example of batch production. So some of the vats will be idle for some parts of the time, and some of the machinery might be only used for one part of the production tasks, whereas with job production it's likely that the machinery is going to be used more frequently. You might need more complex machinery than job production, so it might be more expensive in terms of the technology. The workforce might be less motivated because you've got this repetition of tasks, and unless the batches, the amount that you produce, is very high, the unit cost is likely to stay high itself. The bigger the batches, basically the more items that you're making in every batch, usually the lower the average cost will become. So anyway, that was just a Unit 1 recap. Flow production then. Flow production, there's heavy use of technology to produce a large amount of output. Each item that's produced is identical. So we can see here some bottles of Coca-Cola, and each one of these bottles will be identical to the other bottle within, 1,000th of a millimetre or something like that. So it's using very high technology, high-tech equipment that's going to get that level of precision that you need. And you also have these terms I've mentioned a while ago. Specialisation, this is where workers focus on producing a narrow range of goods. So they focus on one task. So here we have somebody maybe that's packing things, this, I'm not too sure what this job is. Cutting, it looks like. Here we have another person controlling this machine. Here we have another person doing something. I'm not too sure. This person's driving the forklift truck. So each worker can specialize on just a narrow task or range of goods. So they get a lot of repetition, they get a lot of practice doing that, and they should get very good at doing that task because they only have to focus on that one thing. And to do this, you need division of labor. So this is breaking the job down into smaller tasks so that you've got a few people doing it. You might have done this at primary school and said, let's make a production line and, you know, get the job done a little bit quicker. You might have done that with jobs that you have to do. I know that when I'm making Christmas cards with my mum in December, you know, we'll break the process down. So I'll do the gluing and she'll do the cutting and, you know, so on and so on. So you specialize at what you're good at. So you should produce a high quality output. Okay, so you do need to know the advantages and disadvantages of flow production. So large levels of output. So I've already alluded to this, but this tends to lead to lower average costs because to work out your average cost, it's total cost divided by the number of units that you've produced. And the bigger the output, tends to mean that this number on bottom increases at a faster rate than the number on top. And we're going to go through that actually, why that happens in the last presentation that I'm going to do, which is the benefits and the problems of growth. So if you're a bit curious about why that happens, watch that video. Technology the use of technology can produce identical products. So this can really improve the consistency of the product and its quality for the consumer, because consumers really want consistency. Consistency just means that you're getting the same product every time. So when you buy one bottle of Coca-Cola, you want it to be the same as another bottle of Coca-Cola. You want your experience to be the same. And you don't need to hold as large levels of stock because production is going to be continuous. So you don't need to, you know, if we're comparing it to batch production, produce one batch of croissants, maybe if we're thinking about a bakery, and then you're going to produce baguettes, and then you're going to produce rolls, and then you can produce like the stuff that can be sliced bread, you know, and then you have to kind of hold stocks of each of them. Production's going to be very narrow. You're only going to produce one type of product, but you're going to produce it in vast quantities quite quickly, so you don't need to necessarily hold it in stock because you're not going to be making that product for another week because you're always going to be making that product. However, disadvantages, it's going to be very, very expensive. And you can only really do this if you've got a large amount of demand and you've got a large amount of money to invest. So it's no surprise that the businesses that do this are car manufacturing businesses, businesses that sell what we call fast-moving consumer goods. So those are the things that you can buy in supermarkets, such as cleaning products or, you know, fizzy drinks and things like that, because you're only going to get your money back if you're going to be selling a lot of these products. You can use division of labour and specialisation, as we've already said, but this means that the employees only see part of the production process and that the task is very repetitive. Now, this can really demotivate them because they might just feel like they're not very significant to the production process. They're not really contributing to the production process, and it's also boring. Repetitive work tends to be boring. I'm sure you know that. I don't think anyone should, you know, have this experience at school, but when I was at school, sometimes as punishment we had to write out lines, which was just pointless, and it's meant to be punishment because it's boring. And when we're comparing it to batch production, it's less flexible than batch production because, as I said before, you're producing one product. There isn't going to be kind of customization or varying between batches or anything like that. You're just producing one product. So if we're comparing flow production to batch production, think about Coca-Cola just producing bottles of Coca-Cola, the same size bottles all the time, kind of continuous production. And then if we compare it to the idea of a bakery that produces lots of different types of products, that gets that point across there. So I can't stress enough, do revise this area really, really carefully because it very often comes up in the Unit 2 exam.